Style Council, Northside Radio, FM99.3. I'm Richard Bell. And here with Brendon Zoo, we're going to have a chat with an interesting guy. He is a teacher and not your average everyday teacher, I have to say. But before any further ado or any other descriptions, I should welcome him to the program. Jonathan, are you there?
Hi there, Richard. How are you going?
Fantastic. Jonathan Kimsing is a teacher and he's a high school maths teacher at Galston High School, and he's come to notice for the very best of reasons. He's got a very special award from the Premier, and it's got a particular COVID focus there too. COVID doesn't just affect, when you can get on buses and trains, it affects some learning projects and various other special things. And another award, a Learning Edge Award, that I'd like to chat with you this afternoon. But firstly, I'll ask you to welcome and join Brendon, who's going to ask you a few other questions, because I've just learnt that the demographic symmetry here, and as a mathematician, you're going to pick this up really quickly. You're both 25. Right. And chatting off air, there's a little bit of recent technology that I don't recall particularly being in place when I was at school a little further ago than you guys. So, Brendon, can I leave it to you to take us through a couple of very spectacular awards?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us, Jonathan, on the program here. And so why don't we begin? Why don't you tell us a bit about yourself, why you got into teaching, and then how have you found teaching during COVID-19, the question that everyone wants to know.
Yeah, look, as a student back in year 12, I had a really memorable time with my teachers and peers. And it's when you get to really see your teachers in a bit of a different light and form a really great rapport with them. And almost selfishly, I wanted to be a part of that for other people. And as a teacher now, I've been fortunate enough to see many students as they journey throughout their schooling career and finally graduate through year 12.
Mm. Yeah, and how has COVID-19 then impacted the teaching profession? We obviously all remember around March and April the cause for the shutdown of the schools, and many people have had to go through online and virtual learning through Zoom or Microsoft Teams. How have you personally found that experience during COVID-19 as a young teacher and having just gone into the profession recently?
Yeah, even before we get into the classroom situation, it's just been such a challenging time for students and teachers alike just to adjust to the situation. I remember being back in lockdown now in April, and it almost feels kind of surreal. As the restrictions began to ease in term 2, I remember there were many students who were wanting to come back as soon as possible, which is something we're not always used to hearing. Even if it was only just one day a week, just to be able to have that interaction with their peers and teachers, because I think a lot of people have found that, the Zooms and the Microsoft Teams, that kind of interaction that you have, it's very difficult to just have that same personal connection with the people that you're used to seeing.
Yeah. Well, it's extraordinary to hear that, as you just mentioned, that for some of the high schoolers, there's often a view that, they don't like school and they dread going to school. But, after they've had school cancelled and had to go at home, they've obviously now seen it as something that they can't take for granted and want to go back to school. And you just mentioned the stuff about Zoom and Microsoft Teams and using those technologies, not quite the same. As Richard mentioned earlier, you're a relatively younger teacher at the age of 25. Did you see any, in terms of generational impacts between the teachers for those who try to use Zoom, and you're obviously a bit more younger compared to the other teachers who might have had to learn these technology as we go as well?
Yeah, look, I grew up with these technologies, and even for me, I just found it so difficult to conduct the lessons and the activities I usually would in the classroom over these kind of platforms. So I can only imagine the difficulties that older generations who aren't so accustomed to using these in their classroom, the difficulties and barriers that they may have found as well.
Yeah, and so you mentioned some of the difficulties of being a teacher and having to learn the technology as you go as well. One thing that is often spoken about is attracting teachers, but also retention rates for good, high-quality teachers in the education system. From what you've experienced so far, what do you see as potential ways to attract, but also to retain teachers in the profession?
Yeah, you've touched on a really big issue that's going on in the teaching profession at the moment, and I won't pretend to have all the solutions that are there, but I think one thing to consider is that we're living in a very different era to many years and decades ago, where, people expect to change careers and jobs so frequently.
Yeah.
And I think it's one thing to attract high-quality performing teachers to the profession, but we also have to keep and retain them. And I think a big part of that is going to be facilitating opportunities and places where our early career teachers can be mentored and guided towards really having a fulfilling career in education.
Absolutely.
This is Northside Radio FM 99.3. We're speaking with Jonathan Kimsing. He's a 25-year-old teacher. You've grown up in Lane Cove and, a local guy. You've seen the local education that we have across the spectrum here on the North Shore. You're specialising in mathematics, and as part of that, I guess, or was at least part of the context, you were given an award, a COVID-impacted award by the Premier last year. What were you trying to address when you were looking at that award and that the Premier had in mind, obviously, at the time of the award?
Yeah, my research topic was looking at the effectiveness of teaching mathematics through online videos. Because as a student, I really struggled with learning mathematics independently. And while that can be a valuable part of the learning process, I would have loved to have some kind of support and be able to just have some autonomy in the learning process as well. So I think videos are going to be a big part of that now and in the future as we look towards how education is changing.
But you're seeing the videos as supplementary, not as an alternative to the relationship and the learning environment of teachers and students.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the great thing about tools in education. Everybody has a different perspective on what their role is. And so my research here would have looked at the best practice that is currently going around, not just Australia, but in the world as well. And I think with technology, it's always interesting that we think that it's going to be something revolutionary for education. But as you've mentioned, Richard, that it's the personal connections that really distinguish and have stayed true to the test of time throughout education.
What was the Learning Edge award as well? Because you're pretty high profile in that, and there was obviously a strong recognition of your initiatives. What's that about for those that aren't familiar with that?
Yeah, so the Learning Edge competition was a competition which sought to find educators who are using their technology in their classrooms in innovative ways. And they found a whole heap of people around the state doing amazing things. So, for example, I was using online video platforms, but there was also a teacher from Chatswood High who piloted the Run Around Australia Challenge, which allows students to plot the distances of their runs on an interactive map, almost doing like a virtual road trip around Australia. So we sought to look at these different innovative practices here and just kind of celebrate what we're doing in classrooms.
Great. And one of the innovations that you've obviously used was your YouTube channel, which is a big reason why you were awarded these prestigious awards. So tell us a bit about your YouTube channel. Why did you start it? And how have you found this experience of creating this content online for students?
Yeah, I think the first time I was exposed to looking at videos of mathematics teachers was back when I was a student, actually, and watching Eddie Wu's videos for the first time. And I remember not only thinking that this would have been such a great learning resource to have during the HSC, but just the fact that he spends such a considerable amount of time crafting a motivation for the study of a topic before he dives into the content and skills involved in mathematics. And I think that's just such an amazing thing that I want to share and my own take on that for other people as well.
This is Northside Radio FM 99.3. We're speaking with a very talented young teacher, Jonathan Kimsing, and we'll just continue that discussion in a few moments' time. This is The Doors. Northside Radio FM 99.3, that was The Doors. I'm here with Brendon. We're having a chat this afternoon about a range of things touching on inspiring education as well as the COVID era, its impact, bouncing back from it in a careful way. And it's been a pleasure to be discussing these things over the last few moments with Jonathan Kimsing. We're chatting about a range of issues, the impact of COVID and learning and using new technologies, an award you received from the Premier recently, and your involvement and reward in the Learning Edge program. You're a local guy. You were growing up at Lane Cove and now teaching maths yourself. Interestingly, not your your favourite subject at school when you were going through yourself. But a couple of other interesting things we want to touch base with you on, so I'll ask Brendon to ask you about those.
That's right. Yeah. Well, one of the things that we often know as well with mathematics is a lot of myths and conceptions that it's, let's say, boring or irrelevant for students. One of the things we want to know, Jonathan, is how do you encourage your students to enjoy maths, given these views, and how do you make maths relevant for the students?
Yeah, I think that's one big thing that students often find, that mathematics is something that they see in a textbook, and that it's these formulas that an ancient Greek mathematician has come up with hundreds of years ago. But in terms of making things relevant, one particular memory jumps out to me. We were studying the topic of statistics, and it was with a particular group of students who wouldn't perceive mathematics as their favorite subject. But we conducted an NRL statistics assignment and looked at the data information from their favorite NRL teams. And that's the first time I think I've heard a student from another class wanting to do our assignment instead, purely just because it was something that they were interested into.
Yeah, well, I think that's extraordinary that, you've had students at your school who wanted to do this particular assignment on maths because it's interesting. We often, when we get asked if Tim has 3 apples and 4 oranges, what does he have? And, he has obviously a maths question, and it's very hard to make it relevant for young people as well. And so how would you encourage someone then who, let's say, is struggling with maths, sharing from your experience and your story as well, how can they, think a little bit differently about their maths and their approach towards it?
As a student, I understand that it can be difficult when we're put in these kind of environments where we're surrounded by pressures surrounding marks and entries to university and things like that. But I think for those people there that are struggling to enjoy mathematics, I think there's something in mathematics that everyone can find enjoyable, even if they don't enjoy every aspect of it. For example, one thing that I love right now is photography, and the photography of mathematics in terms of how we can capture great pictures is actually really interesting to look at in terms of ratios and things like that. And so for those people who have a particular passion, find how mathematics is relevant to that particular passion and go from there, because I think there's so many good things to love about mathematics.
Yeah.
It's funny, the discussion about how you might make maths practical. I still remember quite some years ago a teacher walking into the classroom, it was for maths, and he kicked off, a bit of an amateur actor I think, by saying today's class is about trigonometry. Everyone, reacted appropriately. But he said, did you see that tackle last night? And he started to digress on a football match and a spectacular tackle, and he was standing there and he was standing there and he was running here and he was running there. And he just climbed into the detail a little bit more. Isn't it funny how he was able to catch him? Do you think it would have been different if he'd run at this angle and this angle? And after about 30 minutes, the class realised this was a trigonometry class. They were looking at angles. They were looking at how far one would have to run if you were angling a certain way towards the other player and all that. This was just pure trigonometry, but it was just being explained through footballers instead of something that they just couldn't relate to. And I think it was, as much as anything, the effort that he wanted to make it relevant more than anything else. But it was a spectacularly successful lesson, and it just involved stepping away from the textbook, but a very experienced educator as well. And those lessons do stay. Your kids will remember these initiatives and things like that. It's a great honour, but it's a challenge as well. I mean, you must find there's a lot of challenges, both meeting the kind of classic teacher-student responsibilities as well as all the other things, the form filling, the obligations to meet criteria and guidelines and various other things. Do you find it overwhelming, or do you still find that there's a sufficient light at the end of the tunnel by the rewards you see in the students?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about that experience that you had. I think it's just beautiful that we can have these memorable times with our students learning without even realizing they're learning. But to answer your question, I think when we think about all these sort of processes in place they're all put there ultimately with the goal of helping our students. So, when I'm doing my registrations and when I'm evaluating the programs, I guess in the back of my mind, I'm remembering what's the point of this and why are we doing this? It's to create better learning experiences for our students.
And just in terms of the way in which we talk about technology as being oriented towards younger people, I've been surprised in a number of other environments how it's a little bit of a split on that. Those in the middle years a little less attuned to it, young ones certainly taking it up to it as second nature almost, but older people as well as the surprise adapters because of the opportunities it gives them to communicate conveniently from home, for example.
Yeah, it's a bit of a fight or flight situation I found because in the classroom, at least, without technology, we haven't had much to fall back on during this period of COVID. And so I've seen a lot of older teachers in my faculty really rise to the occasion, and they're actually leading the development and implementation of this technology in our schools as well. So I think that's really encouraging to see everyone just doing their bit during this difficult and challenging time.
Yeah, and we'll just finish up here with any final tips you might have for all the listeners out there who are currently going through the HSC or their trials, or even the younger ones who are trying to study during this unprecedented time that we have. Any tips that you have for them, Jonathan?
Yeah, the first thing I'd say is just in general, there are a lot of great resources that the New South Wales Department of Education has put out there and subsidised to schools. So make sure you check out the HSC Hub, or you may have a school subscription to Inquisitive or Grolo. These are just really great platforms to utilise during this time. In terms of maths specifically, I think it's very hard for me to speak generally to everyone, but I think the first thing I'd recommend is just speak to your teacher. They know you the best, and they know what kind of areas and things you should focus on.
Great, excellent. Yeah,
and
well,
I guess,
yeah,
sorry. I was just going to say, if I did have one tip for students, I think it's to just have a look at your previous results and assessment tasks. And I always get my students to drop a common mistakes list just to see the things that they need to focus on leading up to the exam. Because, an 80% from one student can be completely different for an 80% for another student.
Right. Yeah, well, good on you, Jonathan, for everything you've done in shaping the future of our country through the education system and using technology to make learning maths fun. And thank you for your time today and sharing about your experiences as a teacher.
Jonathan, that's fantastic. And as we mentioned before, Jonathan Kimsing, he's a local Lane Cove student, now teacher of maths. He's jumped to the other side in a very positive way, now teaching not his favourite subject at the time as a student, also recognised by the Premier with a very special research award last year, Learning Edge award winner, and a lot of great ideas and a lot of optimism for our local youth. So Jonathan Kimsing, thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. Have a great afternoon, and thanks from all at Northside Radio.
Thanks for having me, Richard and Brendon.
Fantastic. This is Northside Radio FM 99.3.
Northside Radio FM 99.3.
Hey, this is Guy Sebastian and you're listening to FM 99.3.